illustrious film and television director, writer and icon of British cinema, Ken Russell. With Sir Peter Blake, the noted British pop artist, author and creator of iconic art images, such as the album cover for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
The only people in the whole of Abbey Road that weren't stoned were myself and George Martin.
It was something I couldn't get out of my mind, and it remained with me forever.
One of the things that surprised me, Ken, and it is such a coincidence, is that you were taken to the cinema by your mother when you were very young. And exactly the same happened to me, that when my father was at work, my mother pretty much every afternoon took me to the cinema, probably from the age of 2. Where was your mother taking you? Which cinemas?
Well, she was taking me basically to the Odeon, where we saw a whole succession of films featuring Shirley Temple.
You saw those as well, but on the list I saw, you saw, was it called Atlantis or Atalante, or you rather your foreign films you were seeing, and German films.
Yeah, I saw a lot of foreign films.
Yeah, the one film I saw again and again, there was always, as you remember, there was always the news. There was usually a cartoon, the news, the main film, and a kind of second film, wasn't there? And the second film that I think was on with everything that I ever saw was the Bowery Boys, Leo Gorcey and Hunt Saul. And that seemed to be with everything that you, I must have seen that 1,000 times, the Bowery Boys films.
Yes, they were firm favourites of mine as a child.
When you mentioned the Odeon, which Odeon was it? Which town?
It was the Odeon, the main Odeon.
Oh, in Leicester Square?
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to the Odeon in Dartford, which was probably a different kettle of fish. But were you born right in London? Are you a Londoner?
No, I was born in Southampton.
Yeah.
I was born in 1927.
Oh, yeah. So what did your parents do? What was your dad's job?
Well, he was, he sold boots and shoes.
In the shop?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And your mum, did she work?
She was like a housewife who just went to the movies practically every afternoon.
Yeah. It's such a coincidence, isn't it? So I would have been, while I was 2, you were 7, but we were seeing the same films.
Yeah. After, the childhood of the cinema, I just went on going to films.
Because when we first met in '61, so 50 years ago, and we had mutual friends, and had you made with Angel in the title a short film, something in the Angel?
Amelia and the Angel.
Because I think you just made that film when you made Pop Goes the Easel, hadn't you?
Yeah. One of my favourite films was about children dressing up and going to films, and they all had stories of their own.
And do you think that was an influence?
Definite influence, yeah.
My dad was an electrician, and my mum had come down from Newcastle to be, I think she'd come down to be a seamstress. She wanted to be a seamstress, but became a nurse. And I was born when she was 20. She was 21 the week after I was born. So when the Second World War started, they were both in jobs that my dad worked. They both worked in a factory at that point. So my dad wasn't in the army or anything like that. So he was a dispatch rider in the Home Guard, and at that point my mum worked in the factory. First time we worked together, the first time we met was Monitor wanted to make a film about pop art, and they suggested that John Schlesinger made it, and we met, and just didn't get on. You know, I mean, I don't think he liked me, and you know, there was nothing in common. And then you took it over for Monitor, and if you remember, we met in the Downbeat Club in Old Compton Street, which is a jazz musicians club at night, but was also open in the afternoon. It was owned by Kenny Graham, Kenny Graham and the Afro-Cubists, and we met in the afternoon, on a sunny afternoon in Soho, talked about the film and about pop art, and I proposed as a joke the title Pop Goes the Easel, you know, as opposed to Pop Goes the Weasel, which you adopted, and the film became Pop Goes the Easel. And for its time, as I say, it was 1961 when pop art really hadn't taken off. I mean, and as you remember, it was about 4 young British pop artists: myself, Peter Phillips, Derek Bosher, and Pauline Boty. And I think you had met Pauline and wanted her to be on the film, and I proposed Peter Phillips and Derek Bosher. And looking back, I mean, it's an extraordinary little film because it was a day in our lives, and you took us. We went to the circus. We went to the wrestling, which, if you remember, we contrived. We didn't film a wrestling match. We used a film of a wrestling match, and we all sat in a row applauding this fictitious wrestling match. But we had such fun doing it. We went down Portobello Road, and it was an extraordinary little film. And then, of course, you went on to do the films, the Elgar film, and those. And much later, the other strange coincidence is that my first wife's father was the art director on the film you made called Altered, the science fiction film you made in Hollywood.
Altered States.
Altered States. Well, Ted Harworth was my father-in-law, and he was the art director on that. Yeah,
it's a small world.
it is. And what are you making now?
I've reverted to mucking around with films like Altered States. Films that I tend to make a sort of mess of. They're more or less comic. One just has fun.
But made without a crew. I mean, just yourself and a...
Yeah.
Are you using film?
Yes.
Are they digital cameras?
No, I still used film.
I'm glad to hear that. And you mentioned that you were making a film on the Isle of Wight?
Yes, I was very fond of the island and had been there a couple of times.
Anyone of our age that went through the war, the beginning of the war was an extraordinary kind of change of childhood, wasn't it? Whenever I'm doing interviews, it comes up again and again, that one's life kind of stopped. So at the age, I was 7 when the war started, and then I was evacuated and came back to Dartford at the end of the war when I was 14 and went straight to art school. So there's a whole chunk of childhood which was taken away, wasn't it? You were evacuated, Ken, were you?
Yes, I was. I went to Bournemouth.
From Southampton?
Southampton, yeah.
It's not much of an evacuation, is it?
No, it was 30 miles.
Yeah.
But that
of course, Southampton would be more likely to be bombed.
To be bombed.
Yeah, of course it would, yeah.
Yeah. We were bombed, so we didn't escape the bombs. And we went back to Southampton and lived there throughout more bombing.
Yeah. I was evacuated. War was announced, as I recall, on the Sunday, wasn't it? And there was one person in the street where I lived in Dartford already had a shelter. So all the children were rushed to the shelter, and we all looked towards Germany, expecting these waves of planes to instantly come over, which of course didn't. But we were then privately evacuated the next day because there was someone who lived in that street who came from a little village in Essex. So we went straight off the next day, and we were there for like 3 years, then came back to Dartford, and we were there for the Blitz and the Battle of Britain. And every time you came back, something new happened. You lived through a drama, and then were evacuated again. It went quiet again. But I was evacuated to an extraordinary household. It was a little village that's right on the intersection of Essex and Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. A little village called Hellions Bumpstead, which was next to a village called Steeple Bumpstead, which at that time a comedian used to talk about. It was a kind of comic village. But the household consisted of the man and woman. The man was in the Navy, but quite elderly by then. So he was stationed at Greenwich and was a batman and would come back every 6 months. The woman, called Mrs. Lofts, I suppose she only would have been in her 40s, but seemed incredibly old. And she had a son, Peter, who was 12, and to my 7, and a daughter who was disabled, and a farm labourer lived in. It was a tiny house, and I don't know how all these people got into that. The farm labourer, and most extraordinarily, an old man called Mr. Grace, who had been in the Boer War, had a leg amputated on the battlefield, and had clearly gone to this tiny village to hide. So he stayed in his room all the time. The priest came once a week, and occasionally when there was no one around in the village, he'd go out for a walk. I recall him as being kind of 7 feet tall and looking like Ahab, but on these big wooden crutches. So it was quite frightening. For me at 7, but for my sister at the age of 5, it was an extraordinary kind of household. And the girl at one point chased my sister all around the house and tried to kill her with a carving knife. So it was colourful, and every lunchtime we were given a penny to get our sweet ration, but we also, as a task, we had to go to the nearest field and collect the molehills, because they were very good soil. So we'd go with two pails, fill these pails with molehill soil, and come back. And one day I thought, I can't go on with this, and I tried to strangle myself in the middle of this field. And of course it's very difficult for a child to, you stop very quickly. But it was a strange, completely time out of one's life. So from 7 to 14, almost, apart from these strange things, didn't exist. So it was an odd time, wasn't it? And you were 12 when it started, so
yeah,
probably even more aware of it.
During the war, I had a sort of bit of a tragedy. I had a cousin called Marion who became a casualty. She trod on a landmine.
Oh no!
And she was blown to pieces.
Was she your age? Or
Yeah.
Were you there?
Yes, I was. We were both sharing a land adventure.
So you were just kind of playing and wandered onto an aerodrome or something like that.
She just trod on this high explosive that just blew her apart. And it was tragic.
And you saw that?
There was nothing I could do.
No.
That was the end of her. She was blown to pieces.
Have you talked about that over the years?
No, I more or less kept it quiet.
But it would stay with you for constantly, I suppose, wouldn't it, as a memory?
Yes, I never really forgot it.
No.
and I never really, I never could get the imagery out of my mind.
Did it affect your filmmaking, do you think?
Well, I think it did, obviously. It was something I couldn't get out of my mind. And it remained with me forever.
So, Amelia and the Angel wasn't your first film?
No, it was about the third.
What was the first?
The first one was, it was a very simple film. It was about a child who loses her angel wings and is going to make another pair, and finally does so before they fall apart.
Yeah. But did I read somewhere that you showed these films as a child? You charged people and set up your own little cinema in the shed.
Yes, I had a garage.
Yeah.
And I made amateur films featuring children.
I think that's just another strong link, isn't it? Because a lot of my work, certainly the very early work, was about children. I mean, it was autobiographical, and it was about cinema clubs. I did a painting called ABC Miners. There was two little boys with their badges on, including belonging to the ABC Miners Saturday Morning Club. And maybe this whole thing about being that age and having this chunk of life taken away by the war isn't a coincidence that we both have worked a lot. And I still, childhood is a theme, as it were, is an important thing. And in a curious way, I still feel very childlike. My work is often, I mean, it's more sophisticated because I'm older and I can do it, but it's almost as though it's done by a child often. And I think that's not a coincidence, is it?
No, I don't think so.
No.
So can you tell me how you actually started art?
It was a coincidence, really. I'd come back from the war. I went to a really terrible secondary school in Dartford that was a pretty painful experience. I mean, I'd been to a terrible secondary school in Worcester by then as well. But and then I got because at that time, if you were away from your home county, and I was in Essex, you still took the examination for the grammar school. You took it in Essex, but you were taking it for a Kent grammar school. So I took mine all by myself in the next village, in Steeple Bumpstead, in fact. Didn't get into the grammar school, and my brother and sister both did, and they went to Dartford Grammar School, which is a very good school. And then I kind of had a second go and tried for the technical school. And I suppose, with my dad being an electrician, I was thinking towards the building trade. So I got an interview, and at the interview at Gravesend Technical School, they said, if you wanted to go to the art school, it's part of the technical school. You can just walk round the corner, do a drawing examination, and go to the art school. And I thought, well, might as well. So I went and did a little drawing, got into the art school, so started at the age of 14 into the junior art department for 3 years, and then the intermediate, and then the national diploma. And one of the very first days, I cycled from Dartford to Gravesend because I was a kind of racing cyclist at that point. And the first life class I did was Quentin Crisp. And Quentin at that time would only have been in his 20s, because he was already flamboyant. I mean, he had blue lipstick on, fully made up, dyed blue hair, blue nails. The Quentin Crisp that became famous later, he was the naked civil servant. And there's a great story that as he all those. There were a whole group of gay models. There was Johnny Noble and Quentin. There were quite a lot of them, and of course they'd be living in London, but working at all these provincial schools. So they would be doing Beckenham and Bromley and Gravesend and the Medway schools. And Quentin was walking from the art school to the station one evening, and a lorry driver leant out of his lorry and said, "You're a bloody old fairy." And Quentin looked up at him and said, "If I was a fairy, dear, I would wave my magic wand at you and I would turn you into a pile of shit." But he was wonderfully flamboyant. But to be at that first at least 6 months at art school, I was still wearing grey flannel short trousers as one did then. I hadn't gone into long trousers yet, so I would be cycling to school. And so I started pretty young. And then by chance, I did the intermediate exam, then did the national diploma. And by that point, I'd wanted to be a painter. But they said, nobody makes a living at painting. You do the commercial art course. So I did a year of the national diploma, which was a 2-year course. Tried for the Royal College as a graphic designer. And Sir Robin Darwin, who was the head of the college, was sitting in on this particular kind of viewing of the work, saw the work and said, perhaps you should show it to the painting school. And the painting school accepted me. So at the age of 21, I'd got into the Royal College, then did national service for 2 years in the RAF, and started at the Royal College. No, I started there at the age of 21, that's right. So I think when I got in, I was probably one of the youngest people ever to get into the Royal College. Then, of course, it's the 3-year course, and one goes from there. And then I did a year travelling in Europe, doing a Leverhulme scholarship, studying popular art. And, of course, it was very soon after that we met and made the film.
How was it like working with Eric Clapton?
Well, it nearly didn't happen because it was a record called 24 Nights. And he did 24 nights at the Albert Hall. I think like a week of the blues, a week with a small band, and a week with an orchestra. And I took lots of photographs, did lots of drawings, building up to rehearsals. And then we went to Dublin, where they were rehearsing. And I had dinner with his then manager. Rose was, her daughter was a tiny baby then, so Chrissy wasn't at the dinner. And right at the end of dinner, he said, "Do you like Eric Clapton's work?" Just a straight question out of the blue. And I said, "Well, I don't much like long guitar solos." And I went back up to the room and said, "I think we blew it. I think we're not going to get this gig. I think I really just blew it." But then working with him was a dream, because I had carte blanche to go anywhere. I could wander around and be backstage and did lots of drawings. So it ended up being really nice. And I then did another cover called Me and Mr. Johnson. So I worked with Eric twice. But people think Sergeant Pepper was the only cover I've done, and even yesterday in the post I got two letters. Things quieten down, as you know, in August, and the post kind of dries up. But there were 4 letters, and 2 of them were a request to sign Sergeant Pepper. So it's something I'm vaguely kind of fed up with. But I worked with Oasis. I did a cover for Stop the Clocks, and I worked with Paul Weller. So I've worked with a lot of nice people.
Regarding football, are you still a fan?
I'm a kind of pseudo Chelsea fan at the moment, because as a kid I was a fan of Dartford, and then over the years I was a fan of Fulham, and kind of still am. But I did some work with Chelsea Football Club the season before last. I worked with Adidas, and they were they bring out new strips every year. But I did a big collage, which they photographed the strip against. So for the last 3 games of the season before last, we got tickets to the Adidas box, where you, if it's a 3 o'clock game, you go at kind of noon and you have lunch and you drink a lot, and then you go out and sit in special seats with a blanket over you. And Chelsea won those 3 games like 7-0 and 8-1. They were 3 extraordinary games, and Anelka and Drogba were just playing dream football together. So, I mean, my football support at the moment is completely artificial, because that was unreal, that little period of 3 or 4 weeks. But so I'm a kind of a pseudo Chelsea fan. I'm really a Fulham fan.
So have you been sort of moonlighting as an actor?
I have, in fact, yeah. I mean, I've worked on I work with you, as you know, and I've worked in television quite often. But I actually worked on 2 of the Harry Potter films, which no one would know. A friend of mine, Mikey Stevenson, was the assistant director, and he just thought it would be nice if Justin de Villeneuve and I worked on the first one we worked on, and so for a week I lived that extraordinary life of being an extra. You were being picked up at 5 in the morning, having the wonderful fried breakfast, going into makeup. In the first one, I was a wizard, and I think they used Peter O'Toole's long knotted wig. I think I wore that, and you don't see me. You see the back of my head for about half a second in a queue of wizards in the bookshop. In the next one, I actually had a line. I was there's a corridor where with pictures, and Harry Potter is in the corridor, and the pictures come to life. And I was kind of dressed like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. I think I was supposed to be a Bosch painting, but I had a kind of tin hat on. And as Harry Potter comes along, I say, I don't know why I did it in a West Country accent, but I say, "We're trying to sleep here, boy." Mm-hmm. And that was my line. That was my one line in movies.
Can you tell us, do you still have memories about those striped pyjamas?
Striped pyjamas? What, in Pop Goes the Easel?
Yeah.
I don't have them anymore, no. But I mean, I have incredible memories about the film. I remember the scene. I suppose that was my first bit of acting. I was doing sleeping acting, wasn't I? You said, pretend you're asleep, and you covered me up with a wonderful kind of bed cover. And I had to act asleep and then act waking up. And I think you panned in on a picture of Brigitte Bardot, and then you interspersed a clip of Brigitte Bardot. So as I woke up, Brigitte Bardot danced across my room.
What do they adore? How cute posterior, handy fat, don't drive me crazy. She's got plenty more in store. Brigitte Bardot, Bardot. Brigitte, bravo, bravo. She wiggles and she wobbles in the nicest way I know.
No, I don't have those pyjamas anymore.
Ah, wonderful. So how do you manage the work you do?
It's not easy sometimes. I mean, there's so much. I'm asked to do a lot of things. At the moment, the main picture I'm working on is a painting that's been commissioned by the Night Bachelors, which is the category of night that I am, and they've newly got a chapel in St Paul's Cathedral, and I've been commissioned to make a 4-foot square painting to go into the chapel. So it's only the second time that the picture has been commissioned by St Paul's. The first time was The Light of the World. The Holman Hunt. I'm told this, I can't really believe it, but this is only the second time. But in contrast to that, you are doing a kind of religious painting. Last week there was an opening that I designed 3 shirts for Fred Perry, you know, the classic button-down, the classic shirt, and I designed 3 kind of pop art shirts for them. So the work is, I'm doing lots of really kind of interesting things at the moment, and there are lots of contrasts.
How does your wife or partner put up with you being so busy?
She's very supportive, you know. I mean, she's a painter. Chrissy is a painter in her own right, but has pretty much given up painting at the moment. To make sure I have a clean shirt every day and to look after me, and you know, for which I'm eternally grateful. So really, her at the moment, she's supporting me. What happened? The same with you. We need wonderful partners.
Yes, we do. We do indeed.
For our generation, Ken, I mean, the people that we were reading at that time, and one of the people was D.H. Lawrence, and you went on to make how many films? 2 or 3,
3 or 4.
yeah. And how was it work with 2 giants like Alan Bates and
Yeah, well,
Oliver?
They both had their problems,
Yeah,
and it was a question of sort of delving into them and laying them bare.
yeah. And controlling them, I suppose. Laying them bare is a good analogy,
Yeah.
you know, for the naked fight scene, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How did you handle that?
Well,
Were they drunk? Was Oliver Reed drunk at that point?
I think they'd had a few drinks.
Actors were different then, weren't they? I mean, I'm not saying actors now aren't great, you know, that someone Jude Law isn't a great actor, but someone like Oliver Reed or Peter O'Toole, or I mean, they were great actors and they were hellraisers, weren't they?
Yes, they knew how to pull off a scene.
Did they rehearse it?
They did, and up to a point. Then they just had let themselves go.
And then you just said stop when you got it.
Yeah,
I imagine it was a pretty genuine fight by then. Or it looks it, doesn't it, on film?
yes. it
Amazing
did.
scene.
Yes, it did.
Taylor's Lazy Sunday.
Do you still own On the Balcony?
I don't, Ken, no. I mean, I don't own any of those early pictures. I mean, the sad thing is they didn't sell at the time.
Oh,
And eventually, I mean, the picture, Self-Portrait with Badges, which was in the John Moores in the same year we made the film, in '61, and was for sale, I think, for £250, which even then wasn't a lot. Nobody bought it. I mean, the Liverpool didn't buy it, the Tate didn't buy it, and I think eventually Pauline Vogelpool, who ran the Contemporary Art Society, they bought it, and it was in the basement of the Tate. And at a certain point, somebody at the Tate, this was a long time ago, said, we would like to acquire On the Balcony. And she said, well, it's in my office. It's been there for 5 years. So those early works, I don't have any of those anymore. And early on, I used to say I didn't want to sell them, but it was kind of hypothetical then anyway. I mean, they didn't sell anyway. And then eventually they did. But I'm interested. I'd love to come back to Oliver Reed, because he's such a larger than life character, and you work with him. I mean, I'd still like to know how you handled him.
yeah. He was a strange bird. He had to be handled with kid gloves. He had a weird way of working. If you could find out the method to his madness, you could get a good performance.
And how did you do that?
More by luck than judgment.
But did you have a kind of code, or did you have a...
Well, you had a sort of code, but you couldn't let him really know what the code was.
But what was it?
Well, that would be telling.
Well, you can tell me.
But
He won't be listening. But later, I mean, you worked with another Hellraiser, with Keith Moon, didn't you?
yeah,
On Tommy. How did you handle him? I mean, because I knew Keith reasonably well, and I knew the Who well. I mean, again, this extraordinary character, wasn't he?
you had to know how to handle him. He had to act in a certain way. So how did you, were you fazed by this excess that was going on around you?
Well, I mean, there are whole areas within the art world where there was no excess. I mean, it went on as before. There were gentlemen painters, and it was quite a gentlemanly thing to do. But I was with the Robert Fraser Gallery, and Robert was a friend of the Stones and a friend of the Beatles, and I guess looking back, he was supplying their drugs as well. So I was surrounded by a drug scene which I never ever got involved with. I mean, I think one of the reasons, I was asked this quite recently, and I think one of the reasons was that having been a child smoker, and stopped smoking at 12, I'd kind of forgotten how to smoke. So at the first dinner party where a joint was passed round, it was passed to me and I held it. And I didn't want to be embarrassed at smoking it badly, so I passed it on in a way that was a moment that from then on I didn't do any drugs at all. But I guess I drank to excess. I mean, I drank a lot, but that was simply a matter of getting better in the morning. I mean, drinking a lot at night and missing some days, and other days being well enough to paint. But luckily I didn't get into drugs, so I was never in a situation where I might have been destroyed. But I suppose my main links with excess were with the music business rather than the art world. I mean, there were nights when they were recording Sgt. Pepper and the Beatles, and I was going in every night to see what had happened. And they would the only people in the whole of Abbey Road that weren't stoned were myself and George Martin. The Beatles would be stoned quite often, and Mick Jagger was there in the evening. And I remember a nice incident where he was there with Marianne Faithfull, and Marianne disappeared for about an hour, and then came back and said, "Oh, I've just been down to the other studio, and there's this group of little boys making a record, and I feel so old, and these are children." And it transpired that it was Pink Floyd who were recording in the other studio. But I did drink a lot. When I was offered the knighthood, and what happens is you get a letter. I was told by two people, you'll be getting a letter, you'll be offered a knighthood, and the letter didn't come. So I thought, well, that's that. And like a year later, suddenly a letter comes through the post, and it says, if you were to be offered a knighthood, would you say yes or no? And you tick a box. And then it says, then you get another letter. I ticked it yes. And then you get another letter saying you mustn't talk about this. So my mum at that point was 90. And I knew if I told her, I mean, as she put the phone down, she would have picked it up again and called all her friends, and it would have been instantly common knowledge. So I couldn't tell her for like 2 months, and she was 90, but she was alive, and she came to the palace, with Chrissy and my daughter Rose, and saw me get that, and that made her proudest of everything, I think. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily the success as a painter, because sometimes, I mean, I'm sure, like your parents with your films, they just didn't understand, did they? And so they didn't, although my pictures are relatively figurative, they didn't, at various points, didn't really understand what it was about. But she was very proud of that.
Have you had any regrets?
There are things I've regretted. There were times, I think, when, without knowing it, one hurt people, and so I regret that. But in terms of ambition, I think I've pretty much achieved. I mean, I've never been that ambitious, but any ambitions I've had, I've pretty much achieved them. I've had 2 retrospectives, and I've done the things I've done, which I'm happy with. I suppose the only professional regret, which isn't a regret anymore, when I was a young man, most young painters hoped or expected they might represent Britain in the Venice Biennale, and that didn't happen when I was young. And in the 60s, if I'd been asked, I would have turned it down because it got very political, and then I never got asked again. But it's not a real regret. I mean, it wasn't important to do it. So no, I'm no real regrets. Have you?
No.
And here we are.
Here we are. Have your children followed you into the art business?
Sort of. I mean, Liberty is my oldest daughter, who is now 43, went to art school, but became pregnant when she was at art school, and that kind of took over her life, really. She's self-educated, home-educated, both her sons. So she, and she's just beginning to paint again, so she did. And Daisy, my other daughter with Jan Harworth, did theatre studies at Bristol, and they then, but when Jan went back to America, they followed her there, and she's been acting in Salt Lake City, but she also trained as a journalist, so she's gone back to doing that, and the daughter that Chrissy and I have, called Rose, has just left the Royal College of Art. She's 24, and she did illustration at the Royal College. So they're all kind of in the arts.
In view of Fred Perry's shirts, what's next?
Well, that's completed now. We had a launch party 2 weeks ago, and that was to design. It's kind of the ultimate pop art in a way. I mean, that idea of the mod shirt and me designing it, it's what pop art should have been about, and is now. But so I'm working on the St Paul's picture, which we've talked about, and for about 10 years I've been illustrating under Milkwood, which is very laborious. I've done 60 sheets of drawings of all the characters. I've done 25 watercolours of the dreams and about 50 other illustrations which are neither the dreams or the characters. But in contrast to that, in the last 2 weeks, the project was to do it in a day, but it hasn't worked. But I'm illustrating Animal Farm, and what I've done, when computers were invented, when the original Quantel was invented, David Hockney and I tested them for people. And the man who invented the Quantel at the time said you could make collages on it. And I didn't understand the concept. I mean, to me then a collage had to be cutting something out and sticking it down. But what I'm doing now, all these years later, is finding all the material that relates to Animal Farm. You have farms and pigs and animals and people, scanning it all. So we've got it all on the computer. And then I'm designing the illustrations actually on the computer. So I'm doing 20 illustrations. And although I didn't manage it in a day, it's going a lot faster than under Milkwood. So I'm doing that, and various shows are on. There's a show on in Bath called A Museum for Myself. So I'm curating. And you? Are you busy?
No.
You must make some more films.
Yes.
Even if you just stand there with a camera.
Yep.
And do it.
I will.
Brilliant. Well, Ken, we've talked about regrets, but do you regret that you didn't marry Glenda Jackson? Do you still have a crush on that?
Well, to my dying day, I'll always have a crush on Glenda.
I think we should make a start on these.
Yeah,
Drinks that have been sitting there, the absinthe.
right.
Here's to everything, Ken. Do you want one of these? Great to talk to you.
You too.
Great to see you again.
Likewise.
And thank you.